Another interest rate rise is now firmly on the agenda after Reserve Bank Governor Michelle Bullock appears before the Senate. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese gets the full stars and stripes treatment, and house prices across capital cities are now just $2,000 off record levels. Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It's Friday, the 27th of October, 2023. I'm Adam Lang, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Adam.
Sean, immediately after the show, we want everyone to stay listening for your chat with Phil Wilson-Brown, the co-founder and CEO of Fetch.
Now, Adam, as you know, I paid some pretty big vet bills over the past few months for a dog that I half like. Now, I'd imagine if your dog Maggie had come into this situation, you would pay twice as much. Anyway, the point is, I speak to Phil, who is the co-founder and CEO of Fetch, as you said. It's basically a pet insurance company, and it's in Australia. Australia has an incredible number of pets. 70% of households has a pet.
Really? 70%?
Yeah, 70%. Only 10% have pet insurance. Isn't that incredible?
Oh, you'd have to say that's an interesting market.
Yeah, really interesting, Mark. So we talked to Phil all about it, what they're hoping to do and how they're hoping to spread the word about pet insurance. Now, my problem is now, I said, can I get pet insurance? The pre-existing condition rule probably hurts me a little bit. But anyway, it's a great interview. Well worth listening to.
Sean, moving on from the wonderful world of pet insurance, the main story this morning, Reserve Bank Governor Michelle Bullock has given her strongest indication yet that the official interest rate will rise on 7 November when the central bank holds its next board meeting.
At a Senate hearing yesterday, Bullock said her immediate impression of Wednesday's inflation data was that it's higher than the Reserve Bank had forecast and will have a material impact on the bank's outlook. It's not exactly an admission that rates are rising, but in Reserve Bank speak, material is a very significant word. The inflation figure, of course, came in at 5.4% for the year to the end of September. Bullock said growth in inflation was not surprising, given that petrol prices had surged 30% since August, and added that the data confirms that services inflation is fairly persistent. She also talked about rents. She said she expects that rents will peak within the next 6 months and top out at around 10% growth before easing somewhat.
So, Sean, that's a very strong indicator about what the Reserve Bank is thinking. Does the market think that rates will rise?
Yes, and certainly the big four banks do. The one that's particularly interesting this time around is Westpac. Now, Westpac has a new chief economist, Lucy Ellis. Ellis used to be the assistant governor at the Reserve Bank. In the world of picking what the Reserve Bank is going to do on rates, having the person who just a few weeks ago used to run the economics team at the central bank and used to do the bank's forecasts, well, that's very helpful. Definitely worth listening to. Ellis yesterday said her first rate forecast for Westpac is that the official cash rate will rise next month. While the headline inflation number wasn't too much higher than expected, Ellis said that some of the details in the Bureau of Statistics figures were concerning. Hence, she thinks the central bank will lift rates. All four big banks, National Australia Bank, Commonwealth Bank, ANZ and Westpac, of course, they're all predicting the official cash rate will go from 4.1% to 4.35% on Melbourne Cup Day.
Sean, amongst that very significant news, how did local markets perform yesterday?
It wasn't such a good day. The S&P ASX 200 closed down 0.6% to finish at 6,812 points. Basically, it's now at the lowest level for 2023. It was a tech sector that led the market lower on the back of poor results on Wall Street. All the banks were lower, with Westpac off more than 1%. CSL, Macquarie, Wesfarmers, Telstra, Woolies, Transurban, they're all off more than 1% as well. Very widespread sell-off. Goodman and Aristocrat Leisure were down around 3%. As I mentioned, the tech stocks were sold off. REA fell more than 4%. Xero and Computershare dropped around 2.5%. The best were the iron ore miners. The big three all rose.
And Sean, what's been happening in international markets?
Well, on Wall Street yesterday, the S&P 500 dropped 1%, and Nasdaq was off even more. Alphabet, owner of Google, plunged almost 10% after its cloud business suffered during the last quarter. We talked about that yesterday. Opposite for Microsoft, it actually rose 3%. Facebook's parent Meta came out. It reported after the market closed. It posted sharply higher earnings for the third quarter, boosted by an increase in advertising revenue and lower expenses after it laid off thousands of workers. In commodity markets, Brent crude is trading at under $90 a barrel. Gold's still sort of heading towards that $2,000 an ounce. Hasn't quite hit there yet. And the Aussie dollar has slipped back below 63 US cents, Adam.
So much happening, Sean. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese got the Stars and Stripes treatment at a dinner at the White House yesterday, Australian time, with President Joe Biden saying the two countries must defend freedom and values.
Wouldn't you love to go to one of these dinners?
I actually would.
It'd be so interesting. Totally. It was a grand affair, apparently. Military bands, candlelit tables, centerpieces, which had a mix of American and Australian flowers, plenty of dignitaries. Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister, now ambassador to the US, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Macquarie Group boss Shamara Wickramanayaka. They were all among the 350 guests. Bit of a love-in, really. And I've got to give kudos to Albanese, who commented to partner Jodie Hayden. He said this publicly on the stage. He looked at her and he basically said he didn't quite know how he was going to top date night after this one. And it's a fair point. It's a good line.
Good.
Biden said the two countries must continue to advance freedom, security and prosperity and to continue to build strong partnerships. Albanese said Australia had no greater friend than the United States. Earlier in the day, Biden and Albanese held a press conference in the White House Rose Garden, told during the meeting that a new Speaker of the US House of Reps had finally been voted in. Biden urged Congress to pass the AUKUS legislation this year.
Sean, there's so many players in a room like that. Have you ever been to a dinner like it?
The closest, I mean, nothing like that, obviously. The closest I've ever been to when I was in Fairfax days was I was invited to the grand final group in the close to 300 people, the AFL grand final. And Julia Gillard was Prime Minister at the time, and she was busy talking to James Packer. Rupert Murdoch was there. I think I'm not sure whether Lachlan Murdoch was there. Rupert Murdoch was definitely there. And it was almost embarrassing to be in the room with all these famous people. But wow, talk about voyeurism at its finest.
Was that the occasion where everyone sung happy birthday to the Prime Minister?
Oh, I don't remember that. I do remember the Sydney Swans beating Hawthorn on the last kick.
Yeah, so that was the one. And guess what? I was in the same room.
Oh, really? Oh, gosh.
Anyway, enough of that indulgence. We'll talk about that later. Domain has released its September quarter house price report, and it says across all capital cities, house prices are just $2,000 below previous records, while apartments are $5,000 below highs.
Pretty remarkable turnaround for that sector. There's now been 3 quarters of growth in both the house and apartment markets. Both were up about 2% across the 3 months to the end of September. Incredibly, given interest rates are still rising, prices are still rising, although not as quickly as earlier in the year. The median house price in Sydney is now almost $1.6 million, while Melbourne and Canberra are just over $1 million. Brisbane and Adelaide are both similar at around $845,000, while Perth and Hobart are around $715,000. Now, units tend to cost about 55% of houses in the main markets. Big exception there is Sydney. An apartment costs less than half of what a house costs in that city. Melbourne is actually where unit prices have done best.
This is a bit salacious, Sean. Former Woolworths chief executive Roger Corbett made a surprise appearance at the supermarket giant's annual meeting, criticising the current chair, Scott Perkins, for supporting the status quo at Endeavour Group.
Now, Adam, this story is especially for you. Have you, in your role running Macquarie Media, did you ever get the call from Roger Corbett?
I've had conversations with Roger Corbett, yes.
Roger taught me a lot about customer service. I remember I used to run the newsrooms at Fairfax and thought I was pretty important getting a phone call from Roger Corbett, who was the chair of Fairfax at the time. And he said, my mate, blah, 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 from Cowra, as in Cowra, New South Wales, didn't get his newspaper this morning. I had no idea what to say. And I remember saying, right, I'm not really responsible for the deliveries. And he said, What are you going to do about it? I had no idea what I was going to do about it. he said, give him a ring. Explain why. His point being, right, at the time I was a bit flabbergasted, but Roger Corbett has always been this amazing person for customer service. And his point was, well, you're a senior person in editorial and you should ring and apologise and work out what went wrong. Like, take responsibility for it. Very good lesson. I bet you've got a few examples like that too with Roger.
No comment, Sean.
Anyway, as you said, he turned up at the Woolies AGM yesterday. Bit of background first. Woolies is a major shareholder of Endeavour, holding about 9%. And right now there's a fight on about who should be on the Endeavour board, with a former Woolies executive, Bill Wavish, trying to gain a seat. Corbett's argument yesterday was that Endeavour was demerged from Woolies to realise value in the group, but its share price is down 40% since then. That's not much value. So it's time to shake up the status quo, and that means changing some of the directors. Hence his comments yesterday. Meanwhile, Woolies received a first strike against its remuneration report at the meeting, partly due to investors taking issue with rewarding executives following the deaths of 2 staff members in the past 12 months. The Endeavour AGM is next Tuesday. It's going to be very, very interesting.
Sean, turning to another supermarket giant, Coles' new boss, Leah Weckert, said the company is working hard to reduce theft, a growing problem for the supermarket chains.
New technologies such as smart gates and more security to help stem theft in stores is expected to be rolled out in over 250 of the most affected sites by the end of this year. While Weckert said it's a short-term problem, a couple of months ago she claimed that lost stock was up 20%, and the perpetrators ranged from organised crime gangs to petty theft. Overall, Coles posted a 3.6% rise in first quarter sales to a little over $10 billion, underpinned by its supermarket business, with customers eating at home and looking for special offers amid pressure on household budgets. The growth rate was less than Woolies reported the day before. Coles Liquor was up, but shoppers are buying cheaper beer. And in the wine category, the growth in sparkling Prosecco and Rosé was offset by lower champagne sales. The ready-to-drink category is also doing pretty well.
There are plenty of annual general meetings going on at the moment, Sean. So what are some of the other highlights?
JB Hi-Fi boss Terry Smart says first quarter sales are trading in line with expectations, trending softer, not so good at the Good Guys, which of course is the white goods retailer, a subsidiary of JB Hi-Fi. Its revenue was down about 12%. The chair of gas pipeline owner APA, Michael Fraser, called for realistic energy policies to avoid blackouts and higher prices for consumers. He said overly ambitious climate targets could cause political and economic upheaval. The APA board also suffered a large protest vote yesterday, and Whitehaven Coal has suffered a first strike against its executive pay regime after 41% of investors voted against the miners' remuneration report at its AGM. Plenty of first strikes out there at the moment, Adam.
Sean, do you think shareholders are getting more active, or is this just a season that we're going through?
Well, it's probably a bit of both. I think activist shareholders have been around for quite a few years now, and proxy advisors are certainly more active, so there's that. But given the performance, the share price performance of some of these companies, I think that...
Fair enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Why wouldn't you?
The founders of Chemist Warehouse have shared a $365 million dividend from the number one pharmacy chain from the $3 billion business.
While profit fell 20%, audited accounts for Chemist Warehouse's parent company, CW Group, showed that Jack Gance and Mario Barocchi and their families were paid $264 million in dividends for the year ended June 30, according to the Financial Review. Directors were paid a further $101 million in dividends earlier in the month, hence the $365 million. The group's international expansion continues. There's new Chemist Warehouse stores opening in New Zealand, Ireland, and China. In all, they've got 545 stores now.
That's a staggering amount of money.
$365 million in dividends. It's not bad.
Okay, staying in the private sector, the Financial Review is also reporting that Crown Resorts, now controlled by Blackstone, narrowed its financial year loss to $199 million.
Revenue jumped 44% to $2.7 billion, but that wasn't enough to offset $3 billion in expenses, boosted by a big investment in compliance and remediation measures, post a number of inquiries into the gaming company over the last 12 months or so. There's also additional costs around the opening of the Sydney casino. The group's also preparing to pay a $450 million fine for breaking counter-terrorism and anti-money laundering regulations.
That's a tough year.
Yeah, that's a really tough year.
Lithium prices might have come off, but the alkali metal is still in high demand, with the board of ASX-listed explorer Azure Minerals accepting a $1.63 billion offer.
Stay with me on this. This is a cracking yarn. So Chilean giant SQM has been stalking Azure for a while, and last month lobbed a $2.31 a share offer, $2.31 a share. Yesterday, the board agreed to the deal after somehow convincing SQM to pay $3.50 a share. That's about 54% above the original offer not that long ago. Not surprisingly, Azure's share price jumped 43% yesterday. It actually closed at $3.49, 1 cent below that $3.50 offer. Now, I reckon Azure's the best performing company on the ASX of all companies this year. It was trading around 22 cents at the beginning of the year. After yesterday's offer, it's up nearly 1,500% since January 3.
That is staggering.
Not bad, is it? Azure's flagship Andover project is in the West Pilbara. Still a ways to go there. Still, the share price up 1,500%. Pretty good.
Let's turn to international news. There's been another mass shooting in the US with at least 22 people dead and up to 60 injured after two separate shootings at a bowling alley and a bar in Maine in the northeast of the USA.
Police are searching for the alleged shooter, 40-year-old Robert Card, who is understood to have military experience, according to CNN. Local police posted a photo of the shooter on Facebook carrying what appeared to be a high-powered semi-automatic style weapon inside a bowling alley. Police also released a picture of a white SUV car and believe they know who the shooting suspect is. Now, Adam, the US has recorded over 500 mass shootings this year, according to the Gun Violence Archive. Now, it's a non-government organisation. It defines a mass shooting as 4 or more people wounded or killed. 500 mass shootings. Efforts to tighten gun controls have run up against opposition from Republicans. Many of them are very staunch defenders of the constitutional right to bear arms.
Sean, the US House of Representatives elected Republican Mike Johnson, a conservative with little leadership experience, as its Speaker yesterday, ending a 3-week period where the chamber was unable to carry out any of its basic duties.
The 220 to 209 party line vote elevated Johnson to a leadership post that's been vacant since Kevin McCarthy was ousted on October 3. Johnson, a Trump supporter, said he'd soon call up legislation to signal support for Israel. First elected in 2016, Johnson will be the least experienced House Speaker in decades. Very, very big job, that one. A lot of pressure. Good luck to him. He's best known as the author of an unsuccessful appeal by 126 House Republicans to get the Supreme Court to overturn election results in states that Donald Trump lost in the 2020 presidential election. Here we go again.
Kind of stunning that he still managed to prevail and become Speaker.
Who knows? Who knows?
Always interesting US politics.
Yep.
Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview with Phil Wilson-Brown, co-founder and CEO of Fetch.
All around pet insurance, well worth a listen.
That's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your favourite podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Adam.
It's Friday, the 27th of October, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X and Facebook. And have a great day.